BJJ is one of the most popular martial arts in the world today. Yet, as in any martial art, there's no shortage of controversies in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, such as the concern that the sports element of BJJ is watering down the martial art, or a lack of focus on the self-defense elements, such as learning how to deal with strikes or defending against a knife. In order to find out more about these problems, and if they are true, I contacted Eli Knight, a famous Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and self-defense expert who is also known as a black belt under the legendary Royce Gracie. To start out the conversation, I went straight to the point and asked Eli if he thinks that BJJ is in fact watering down and becoming worse as a martial art. Here's what he had to say. Now, when I look at the evolution of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I also, in my mind, to some degree compare it to Judo, because it's a subject I was just exploring lately. And there is a common debate in Judo that it became quote-unquote watered down, primarily because of the sports aspect, because the sport became such a big and important part of it that eventually most of the schools started training only what is designed for the sport element, and the sport is designed for spectator-friendly watching session. And I sometimes see that Jiu-Jitsu may have a little bit of that danger, the butt scooting or sitting down on the ground immediately, which is just not self-defense proof. And there's a whole discussion about that, which I'll continue to ask you more about. But starting off with the idea of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu being in a danger of becoming a worse martial art because of the sports element, when somebody talks to you about that, what's your general response?
Yeah, every martial art is in danger of being watered down because it's happened to literally every martial art that's ever existed has been watered down. Some have stood the test of time better than others, but and there's multiple dangers. I think that the proliferation of the sport isn't the most dangerous thing to water down a martial arts effectiveness at all. I think it is. I mean, like you were saying, once you mistake the part for the whole, there's going to be a watering down process. Whenever. And that's always been my thing. It's like, I don't care if there's schools out there that teach you day one, what you want to do in a match is go out and slap hands and sit down and then, try to grab an ankle. And as long as you're being intellectually honest with your student base and saying, look, we are training specifically these elements of this martial art for this sportive context with this finite rule set, then you're not doing anything wrong, because you're explaining to the student, we're not a mathematics school. We are a long division school. We focus on long division and that's it. We're super concerned about these other kind of equations. We're not super concerned about geometry. We're long division only, so that's fine. It's whenever people aren't intellectually honest and they say, this is jiu-jitsu, this is self-defense, this is, and they put self-defense in giant letters on the side of their building. And then you go in and, they're spending, a month straight on beer and bolo. And it's like, okay, you're not, you're being a little dishonest, and so you are doing a disservice to that degree. When you, on the flip side, it's true too. I mean, you have a self-defense focused school, which is a little more my I think background more than the sport, even though I love both and train both a lot. When you go into a place and they're like, we're not even going to recognize these techniques. We're not even going to pay any attention to these techniques because they're not what we deem street readiness, what we deem as this is going to help you in a street fight. Or we think that you're so stupid that if we show you a berimbolo, that you're going to try it next time you're mugged. That's how dumb we think you are. So I think that both do a disservice at the extremes. But I think that with a little bit of contextualizing by a decently intelligent instructor, those are pretty easily avoidable conversations. It's like, and I do that all the time in class. Again, going back to the class I just got done teaching a second ago, I was explaining look, from an MMA, this was a no-gi grappling class. And I was showing about side control, how to isolate the arms, how to set up branch up and branch down arm locks, how to, set up some other things from there. I was like, in an MMA context, this is a great position because you're stapling the arms. You got good striking potential from here, but it depends on, and some techniques, some positions, some things like that are great suited for all, we could say maybe 4 varieties, gi grappling, no gi grappling, self-defense, MMA, so you have a wide variety of rule changes through there. Now, if I may, what I think is one of the main reasons that martial arts get watered down more than anything is because it's just a natural byproduct of the bigger your classes get. The more you spread it to larger numbers of people, it's going to have to get watered down, because you're going to have to find in a group, it's a difference in me teaching 5 people in a group versus teaching 50 on a mat. I can't go around and manually adjust everybody. Even if I have a couple of helpers, we can only hit so many people. And if I'm teaching bigger and bigger and bigger groups, I'm going to have to cater to some degree to the lowest common denominator. Okay, what can everybody in here do? All right. This is, I think, I don't have any proof of this, but I think this is a big reason why katas ever got created.
Right.
Because you start to put things in a kata. And so that's why, you go into a lot of karate schools, and then the master in the school gives you some kind of bullshit reason for what this retracting hand back here when you're throwing your reverse punch means. That's kind of a good litmus test. It's like, what is that? What does this mean? Why are you doing this? Why are you pulling that hikite, that withdrawing hand back? And if they say something along the lines of, well, it's just to add power and torque behind the punch, then you're like, okay, I'm going to leave now. I'm kind of done with this conversation, because it's, if you look at the even just old texts of outlines of, why these things look like they did and how they put them into forms, it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating, but it's, it gets watered down. And then I think that, eventually you don't have the priority of keeping that explanation of the move behind teaching the move. So now things just kind of get disseminated, and then people are like, why are we doing this? And they don't have a good answer. They have to make something up. And so there's a lot of reasons why I think that martial arts get watered down, but I think that's one of the biggest ones. It takes a while over time for that to happen. But
you mentioned that lack of intellectual honesty, which I was a victim of, I'd say. I think many people are in various martial arts, and
I have been.
Okay, and I think in some martial arts it's very common that lack of intellectual honesty. But what about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu? Does it happen as well, or more or less? What would you say?
I'm usually inclined to say less, because I don't know that there's ever been in our lifetime, not that I'm aware of through. I don't want to dismiss it and say absolutely, but I think that in our lifetime, there's probably never been a martial art that's more centered around the idea of pressure testing.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, there's the rubber hits the road pretty fast in jiu-jitsu. So for you to go into a place and the instructor to show something that's a little suspicious looking, and whether you wholeheartedly buy into it or you don't, once you go to roll and you try it out, you're like, okay, that didn't come close to materializing. And you go back to the instructor, it's like, what am I doing wrong? Maybe they can help you and adjust you, and it was just a user error,
Right.
But and then other times that if you see that, okay, this is never materializing, this is never happening, this is just not a thing, and then it's going to become more apparent later on. It's a lot harder to quantify that in a martial art where it's like, okay, if you hit a guy like this, his heart's going to explode. Okay, we can't test it, because we'd run out of students really quickly. So this was another thing I was talking to someone recently about. Anytime that you have too much certitude by an instructor to say, okay, if you do this, it's going to cause this reaction, especially in percussive martial arts. Like, man, you don't need to count on that at all. Like it's if it's a structural damaging thing, maybe, but if it's more of a pain thing, it's like, if you cause this pain, the person's going to react this way. It's like, whew, that's right out the window, So I think that, getting to what you were talking about, though, I think that intellectual honesty is a little bit more an imperative in jiu-jitsu training and all grappling training, because the testing has to come out a lot sooner, and a lot more definite.
Right. Yeah. It's great that you mentioned that aspect of context, and I think it's such a important key aspect. At the same time, I am sometimes to some degree concerned, again, like much less about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, because it's a great point that you made, that there's so much pressure testing there, and that kind of just forces you into being honest. And I do meet quite a bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu people who are aware that, okay, I actually don't know striking, or actually I don't know how to even like deal with strikes on the ground. But I won't be surprised, and I'm not surprised if I meet also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu person who does not understand that actually there's a key element missing from the training, and they think, okay, well, I know Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which oftentimes there's no strikes, there's no ground and pound, there's not a lot of even standing work, but then there's the idea that, okay, whether it's self-inflicted, the person just comes to that conclusion, or even if the school promotes that, it's like, okay, now you know how to defend yourself, and that's lacking because it's a different context. So what's and maybe I can actually even bridge it into a question where from what I noticed, not a lot of schools practice striking whatsoever in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So what's your opinion about that? Do you think it's lacking? And do you think people sometimes get confused about that element not being there and not even missing it?
Yeah, I think both are probably true. I think that even if you are, my feeling about it, and again, it's like, as long as you are honest about what you're training for, and you just don't make assumptions of like, well, our jiu-jitsu is so good that it doesn't matter if they try to hit us. It doesn't matter if this happens because we're so controlling in this, and I can get into this armbar, this chokehold so quickly and so effortlessly against people who don't know how to operate, that they'll never have a chance to hit me. And it's like, I mean, that's a dangerous proposition. I think that's that's when people become a little too overly confident. That, and to the same degree too, sometimes you'll have the advanced students or the teachers that are able to toy with their students so much that they start to get away with some things and portray them as this is possible, not knowing that it's not really possible unless the deficit is huge between the people. But I think as far as the striking element of it, I think that is important. And I think that this most recently probably came to the surface, or should have, with combat jiu-jitsu. So when you watch the combat jiu-jitsu and you started to see guys that all of a sudden getting slapped in the face made them look like and the high level, extremely talented, extremely technical jiu-jitsu practitioners, they get slapped in the face, and all of a sudden their skill level shrinks quite a bit, and then before long they're kind of floundering and not looking like they're doing a whole lot of jiu-jitsu anymore because they're in survivability mode. But I think that it is important. It's really an important thing. I think for myself, I kind of handicapped myself for a long time that I was so concerned about. This was years and years back when I was first really getting into grappling, and I was so concerned with where strikes could live and how effective strikes could be in certain areas that I wouldn't even pass through areas if I felt like I was taking too big of a chance of getting hit in certain places. Once I started to give myself a little more permission to be looser with that, my jiu-jitsu shot up, because I wasn't so hyper focused on that. I think though, every single training academy, every gym, every school out there could greatly benefit though from even just once a month, just having throwing on 4-ounce gloves, or slapping each other during a training session lightly, even, because even just lightly touching somebody's cheek in a slapping motion in a position is going to make them recalibrate a little bit. It's going to make them take inventory of that. And it's like, oh shit, well, now I need to respect that. And that has to take my attention away from this controlling element of this position. So, and then, to take it a step further, I think, throw in a rubber training knife once in a while. Throw in maybe a little unloaded little airsoft pistol, so it has that clicking sound, so that you could possibly get shot, and just to see what other elements kind of exist. Play games where during the roll, at some point, another person's going to jump in before that roll is stopped. And so now you're for at least a second until there's no exchange made, now you're having to grapple essentially with two people and see, how that materializes. So, I mean, just to kind of explore those things, that then doesn't have to be anybody's focus, but it also can be. you know. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that in itself, I think really has to expand your awareness of the strengths and the liabilities and everything else about what you're training and how you're training it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I think today I'm kind of more being and playing the devil's advocate, and trying to look at the side which a lot of people question, and I think there's some merit to those questions, and that's why it's important to talk about it, and that's why I'm excited that we're talking about it. But like if I were in a general conversation and if somebody would ask me like, is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Jiu-Jitsu is good for self-defense? And if I have to say yes or no,
Yeah.
I'd say yes, definitely much more than no. Then there's that disclaimer where I would have to say, well, but it's important that you'd add this element and this element. But there's a conversation which stuck with me for a long time of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt who also used to be a police officer, like SWAT team member, so self-defense guy, knows his stuff. And when I first asked him, because at that moment I did not know, like, so does jiu-jitsu work in self-defense or not? And he pointed out that there's missing elements, but if you're good at jiu-jitsu and you tweak those people a little bit, you just give them the right elements, they're going to be like beasts and dangerous people very quickly. And I tend to believe that still till today.
Yeah, like wrestlers. I mean,
Right.
you take a wrestler with virtually nothing else, and they're gonna be fine in most self-defense situations. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you give them you give a wrestler a couple of submissions, and they're going to be hitting it on advanced level guys in a jiu-jitsu class like pretty instantaneously.
Mm.
You give them a couple of fundamental boxing skills, and they're just a dangerous human. Period.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, you also mentioned knife, and that's one of the other fascinating things I wanted to ask you about. I saw that you teach a curriculum with knife defense in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which personally just seems to me like it's a rare thing. Like I saw some old videos of like Helio Gracie teaching some knife stuff, but there was not even like, I wouldn't see pressure testing footage of it,
Yeah.
and it's just like a tiny bit, but it's just not much out there. So I'm really interested, like, what's your approach about knife defense in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
Well, I think the only two conversations that typically ever surface about like knife defense is like, it's pointless to even train it because it's, you're going to die if somebody attacks you with a knife. So why even bother? I don't really like that.
Yeah, yeah, it's not a great,
it's
not
like,
positive perspective.
I'm probably going to die in a car wreck anyway if I have a wreck, so I'm just not even going to wear the seatbelt.
Right,
It's
yeah,
just,
yeah,
why not take some precautions, and
sure.
but I think that over time though too, the thing that stood out to me, because I did Filipino martial arts for a long time, and once you start to do anything knife related, if you start to talk about knife defense or self-defense in a situation where there might be a knife, inevitably, if you're exposed to a comment section of any kind, you're going to get comments about, oh, leave that to the Filipino martial arts guys. Like, that's their lane, you stay in your lane, kind of thing. In my experience over the years, and it's been fairly extensive of what I've seen and trained in, Filipino martial arts, empty hand versus knife is sorely lacking. Like, there's very little to anything Filipino martial arts wise. It is Filipino martial arts wise, stick versus stick, knife versus knife, stick and knife, like all these different dueling kind of things. Absolutely fantastic. It's great, but as far as learning how to defend yourself if somebody was trying to like stab you, there's not a lot to that. Not something that's very realistic looking.
Right.
The most realistic thing that I have ever come across in dealing with, if somebody has a knife, training knife or whatever, or just watch some closed circuit TV footage or watch some World Star or whatever videos you have of somebody stabbing somebody, you can't stab somebody unless you're in grappling range. So, and inherently, if I pull a knife, a rubber floppy training knife out and act like I'm going to poke you in the stomach with it, I know exactly what you're going to do. Like, and then you're going to go, oh shit, and you're going to grab that. Right. So now we're grappling. Now, so the most realistic thing, in my opinion, about knife defense, if you really want to like try to prepare yourself because you think that someday someone could possibly try to stab you, which is, it's not the worst thing to hedge your bets on. I think it's a good idea to at least train at some. you
Sure.
need to have some kind of very pressurized situation where somebody is trying to put the pointy end of this training knife into you. And what you're going to find is that what materializes more than anything naturally is grappling, whether you want to or not. You know, it's like I think I heard you talking about there was a video I was listening to you talk about, you know, you did all this Aikido training, and then like whenever like you went to like a fight happened or something, you went to punch the guy. It's like you were never even taught to punch. You never even trained any striking, but there's just something about our lizard part of our brain that, you know, we think, okay, this is a threat, I got to bash it. You know, this is a threat, I got to stop it from touching me. You know, so there's something just extremely natural, instinctive, and intuitive for us to grapple whenever we're faced with that kind of danger. So, there's really been a lot of this is not all my thinking either, but I've been very fortunate to work with some extremely intelligent people in this kind of setting. And I can name several of them. One of the main people that I do what we call knife control concepts with to this day is Aaron Giannetti. And he's absolutely brilliant guy. And he's put a ton of work into it, him and Mike Chaney both. And, you know, together, the three of us have been really trying to, you know, I guess I hate to call it, it's a course. You know, I think the material is presented in a course. So we've been trying to formulate this a little better and refine it down to, you know, almost like chain wrestling. It's more like chain wrestling or flow drills, but it's not flow drills in the sense of the kind of stuff you might see in like Wing Chun or Filipino martial arts. Right. This is wrestling. We're looking to establish, you know, 2-on-1 grips on this arm. We're looking to get body locks on the guy in a way that he's not able to really functionally wield that knife bearing limb, you know, and we're looking to get the guy into an isolated position. But it's a receptive kind of thing, though. It's a fluid kind of thing where if there is an exchange of hands with the weapon, if there is a turning, a change of the direction, that it's not a step-by-step, okay, block here, hit here, do this. And that's why I think that concept of chaining together the drills like that are going to enhance your awareness. And it's not going to be such an oh shit moment whenever things do deviate from the plan, whatever the plan is. So I think it's hard to explain to somebody without them really seeing the material. But I also try really hard to explain it because there's so much garbage knife defense out there.
Yeah, right.
And it has become so much of a laughable topic, the way that a lot of people present knife defense out there. And even from good martial arts, you know, like you'll see a lot of the time somebody can check every box and it's like, man, they really know their stuff here and here and here. It's like, well, what would you do for knife defense? And they show something that looks like it's out of a 1983 Inside Kung Fu magazine. And it's just, where did you like miss the mark on that? So
right. Yeah. That's a great point. And it's something I keep addressing myself in my videos once in a while, where, you know, there's this kind of black belt syndrome where if somebody has a black belt or they're like a good fighter, they come to this conclusion that means I know everything about fighting, and just like, give me a knife. It's like, I'm going to figure out how to deal with it. And there's this infamous video, which I keep putting up, of Anderson Silva, you know, amazing fighter, but he you know, the knife
shows
he goes like, arm and, right, exactly. It's like, no, but then people believe him because it's like, oh, look, he's a fighter, you know.
Right.
So
yeah, it's like, he wouldn't show something that's bullshit, surely. You know, he's and he's gone out and he's proven this and everything. And that is a really real thing. And I think that it shows up very apparently in martial arts like that, you know, because I respect this person, and I think this person is one of the greatest fighters in the world to the capacity which I've seen them fight. You know, now I have to put that in context. What's the capacity I've seen him fight? But, you know, how many knives were in the octagon at the time that he was fighting? But it's kind of like that for everything. I think as humans, we're like that with a lot of things, right? It's why we're so devastated when we hear a bad story about, like, you know, a celebrity that's fallen on hard times, you know. It's like, oh man, I really liked Bill Cosby. Oh, I really liked Michael Jackson. I really,
Right.
it's like, you know what? Michael Jackson still made some of the greatest pop songs of
Right.
all
Right.
time.
These
It's
are two
okay.
different things, right?
Yeah. Two things can be true. You know,
Right.
this can be a garbage human. Even garbage humans can do great things and vice
Mm,
versa, you know.
right. Yeah. Well, there's one more thing I remembered as I was listening to you, and it's actually also what came up in the conversation with IC Mike. And it's something I never thought about, but once he said it, I don't know if maybe that's even related with some of the subjects you discussed about with him, but that good self-defense eventually almost always goes to looking like wrestling,
Hmm.
which I never thought about it before. But once he said it, I just like a lot of flashing images came through my mind of like good self-defense videos I saw. And it's true. It's either, boxing or wrestling. So did you explore that subject yourself as well?
Oh, for sure.
Mm.
Absolutely. I mean, because like I said, the first exposure I had to martial arts was Taekwondo. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and it's awesome in movies. Every movie you would see from the 80s and 90s, for the most part, to an extent, was, it was Bruce Lee Game of Death style, or
Mm-hmm.
Chinese Connection. Whenever he's in a room full of people and just kicks this guy, he goes flying, hits this guy, he goes flying. And it's or it's a cooperative, like I hit you and knock you down, and then I step back, let you get back up, and now we start striking again. I think one of the best analogies I ever heard for that, though, that phenomenon, was like, watch any boxing match ever, and
Mm.
watch how many times these two guys, who their sole purpose is to strike with their hands and knock the other person out, how many times do they clinch in a single
Right.
round? Right?
Right.
It's an amazing amount of times, and
Mm.
so it is the most natural element of fighting in the world, I think.
Mm.
um, and I think that any martial art worth its merit um, recognizes that. And getting back to what we were talking about earlier with the watering down of martial arts,
Mm.
karate was a grappling martial art. Like, karate overwhelmingly is a grappling martial art from its inception.
Mm.
Striking was supplemental.
Oh wow.
It was like so you look at a lot of the katas and stuff, and it's like people are trying to plug in systems of like, what's this strike supposed to be? What's that strike supposed to be? Where is this hitting? A lot of these things are throws. A lot of these things
Mm.
are trips. A lot of these things are, I'm grabbing the guy's kimono or his shirt or whatever, and I'm hitting with this hand. There's a lot of grappling in, I think, in the systems that have really stuck around through the ages. They are primarily grappling based, if they're worth anything, because they know
Mm.
how it's much easier to, like, repurpose a set of instincts in a person and weaponize that than it is to override them and delete that programming and then write a
Mm.
new program.
Right.
So if it's instinctive for me, once I'm in a fight, to grab a hold of this person, well, how can we weaponize that? Right.
Mm.
That's much more effective. And how can we take the most chaotic part of a fight, where we're the clumsiest of animals, and how can we clear out some of the chaos of that? And that's what jiu-jitsu, particularly from the paradigm of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, has done. It
Mm.
took the idea of, okay, well, we're not very efficient animals on a horizontal plane, right? Once we get on the
Mm-hmm.
ground, we're extremely inefficient. We're bipedal.
Right.
So we're coordinated standing up. You put two guys wrestling around on the ground, which is what not just humans but all animals do. That
Mm-hmm.
they will fight, and they'll roll around and tussle and wind up in these awkward positions. Well, what if we systematically kind of approach this and look at how can I structure out and get the positional advantage on this person? And is
Mm.
there a positional hierarchy that can be established where I can upgrade my position, and I
Mm.
can put this other person in a disadvantageous position to where they're going to burn up a lot of energy trying to flail and move around. So, I mean, that's what the brilliance of jiu-jitsu is, from that kind of idea. So,
Mm-hmm.
taking the approach of, okay, we're going to start out fighting from a distance, and that distance is going to collapse because that's the nature of violence. If we want to fight, we're not going to dance a whole lot. If
Mm.
it's really violent, and I'm really thinking that this is a violent encounter and this person wants to do me harm, he can't do it from 6 feet away.
Mm.
He's got to crash that range. Okay, so I can only keep this distance for a certain amount of time, but I can try to manage that distance until it's time to close that distance. Now that we close that distance, well, what next? Well, we can't fly. So we have to go down instead, right? We can't go up. We have to go down. So if I can control the takedown and land in an advantageous position and put him in a deficit right off the beginning, well, now I'm really doing something, and I'm being way more efficient in this combative exchange than this person is. So
right. You brought up one more subject which I wanted to ask you about, and that's there's the vertical plane and there's the horizontal, and jiu-jitsu spends most of the time on the horizontal plane, but the vertical is also there, and that's one of my concerns. And as much as I can have a concern about it as just a guy, but that many jiu-jitsu schools seem to prefer the ground, and I think it's not uncommon, and do you correct me if you find me saying it wrong, but that many schools, they don't even spend that much time in stand-up, and then a wrestler comes in and just destroys everyone on the feet. So first of all, is that your impression as well of like a general picture of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and why do you think that happens?
Yeah, it happens for a lot of reasons. I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons that does happen. The one that I could really, I guess, focus on though is the lack of strikes in jiu-jitsu for the most part. It depends on, it kind of depends on the paradigm you're coming from. I mean, in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, they would say that striking is one of the elements, I think 5 elements basically of the art, So there's standing striking, there's standing self-defense, there's throws and takedowns, there's positional grappling on the ground, and there's the philosophy or the mindset, So I think that, when looking at that, if we're talking again from a self-defense perspective, we're not talking about a prize fight, right? So striking becomes way more important, and dealing with strikes becomes way more important than a prize fight, because you're talking about a technical opponent, assumingly. When you're talking about someone in a self-defense context that's attacking you, the likelihood of them being trained and experienced and technical is much, much lower, just statistically. So you got to think about it from that regard. So if I think about, okay, this drunk guy on the street who asked me for change and I told him no, and now he's wanting to swing at me. Well, how technical of a boxer do I need to be to deal with that? If instead, can I notice that I just need to be able to recognize, I need to be able to recognize the distance that he needs to be at to be able to hit me. Stay outside of that distance until I can get inside of that distance where he can't hit me super effectively, where there's no trajectory, there's no velocity behind the strikes, and then get the takedown and control him on the ground. So from a self-defense context, the striking focus is much more muted, I guess, for that regard, because I think that's ultimately like where it's coming from. Now, so that's why for the most part, the primary strikes you'll see in traditional like Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, the main ones focused on are going to be the kick, because the kick is using your longest limb to be able to gauge the distance, whether to keep the distance or to crash the distance. So you're going to use that kick, and you'll hear some different conversation about whether which deserves more focus on the pisão, which is either side kick or front kick. But either way, it's a long range weapon using to close the distance. You also see slaps, elbows, knees, so close range things. So there's a tool for every range that could potentially be strikes. Now, the ones who will take that striking element further are going to supplement. You have to supplement. And anyone who says that their art just magically appeared in the universe, like as its like complete system, or its founders like put everything into it that it ever needed and is ever going to need, I think they're trying to sell you something. I think that for the most part, people are going to recognize like, hey, we need striking to supplement these certain areas, and we need good striking. So maybe we need to look at Muay Thai. Maybe we need to look at Western boxing. Maybe we need to look at Savate, maybe whatever. And it's okay. You can, there's that theory of, I'm jumping around a little bit, but it's the idea, I forget the name of it, but it's the theory, the philosophical theory of the boat, like the sailing vessel, of like, well, it's this part was falling off of it, this part was rotten, this part was damaged, so you have to replace and replace and replace. How much of that boat can you replace until it's not that boat anymore? Right. So I think that that's something you have to kind of ask yourself, because getting into like conversations and arguments, especially a lot of the time about, yeah, he threw that kick, but that wasn't a Muay Thai kick. That was a Kyokushin kick. That was this, and it's like, it was a damn kick. It was a kick to the leg. And if he looked a little like a Muay Thai guy, but he's never done Muay Thai, could you call that a Muay Thai kick? So it's like, a lot of the conversations get a little silly after a while. If I box the guy, I'm in a fight and I box with the guy for 3 minutes and I bust him up and he busts me up. And then eventually one of us tackles the other one and gets us on the ground and chokes the guy out. Was that a jiu-jitsu fight or was that a boxing fight? Right? It's like, what are we talking about? So, I think that, again, going back to intellectual honesty, if we're really looking, if we're so caught up and hindered by staying true to what we perceive our style or our system to be, that we're not willing to branch out and say, okay, the striking that I learned at my jiu-jitsu school just isn't very good. I want to feel more competent and confident in striking. Then, I'm going to work with a boxing coach. I'm going to work with a Muay Thai coach. I'm going to do this or that. My takedowns in my jiu-jitsu school don't seem as good as this wrestling place down here. I'm going to go train with these high school wrestlers here that can come in and toss my guys around like rag dolls and see, how can that enhance what I'm doing? And I think that you can add and add and add a lot and still keep it and call it jiu-jitsu. That's what I've done over the years. I call what I do to this day jiu-jitsu, even though like a lot of times I'll teach something. I'm like, man, I learned every ounce of this from a judo class. I learned every ounce of this from my wrestler buddy. I learned all of this shit here from a Muay Thai clinch class that I had. So it's tough to discern that sometimes.
Right. Yeah. I guess it's one of my conclusions that I came to after I recently had my second MMA fight. It didn't turn out the way I wanted it. But I thought, okay, so what should I fix as I continue on my journey? And I realized that I was primarily training either Brazilian Jiu Jitsu or kickboxing for the past year and a half or so. And in my mind, I thought, okay, that's like, those two are like kind of the main components of MMA. So I'm going to be fine. I did obviously some MMA training in the past, so some wrestling, but I never really, and that's what occurred to me, I never really went to proper wrestling classes, maybe like one or two, which doesn't count. And even though my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach, he's self-defense oriented and he always talks about strikes and we do work on stand-up, but still there's only so much we can do in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class because it's not designed to be a wrestling class. And only after that experience of losing, where I had to like really like dig through and analyze everything, I realized this kind of self-evident thinking, realization came up. Like even in kickboxing, they're never going to be as strong of strikers, like punchers, as the boxing guys, because they're forced to play in that specific realm and outplay each other. And that's like that 100% of the time is spent there. In kickboxing, 50% is spent on kicking, and obviously, or like 40, whatever. So obviously you're not going to be as good in both levels. And then the same with wrestling. I realized, damn, I actually need to just go to a proper wrestling place and wrestle with these guys, get my ass handed to me until I eventually can do at least something with them. But I cannot expect just going all the time to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and kind of magically become good in wrestling. So it was kind of a big realization for me. I guess it's similar to what you're talking about in a way.
Yeah, I mean, not these days. I mean, maybe in the 90s you could just have a BJJ purple belt and do pretty okay in a amateur or maybe even low level pro MMA fights.
Right.
But it's these days. I mean, it's just the information and the level of training is so ubiquitous. I mean, it's just there's high level training almost any town that you can go to within proximity of you, and it's a great thing. I mean, it's interesting. It makes it tougher for coaches and stuff out there a lot of the time, but it's really I think a net positive for the most part.
Right. And the culture of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or well, I keep saying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I keep remembering.
Yeah. So I process it right. It's fine.
Right. so that the culture generally tends to be, in my experience, nicer than many of the traditional martial arts schools. And even, I guess, the MMA places I went to, they either I'm lucky or because they're nice. I'm sure there are these fight club places still around, but my experience was positive. But still, like in general, the culture and microclimate of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is kind of laid back, chill. There's no worshiping, or I guess there's some times, but these are rare cases, exceptions to the rule. Generally, there's no worshiping of the instructor. The instructor is kind of more like everybody respects that person because they know he can kick their ass, but that person is usually, it's not like, oh, worship me or I'm better than you. And just in general, people are just chill. And so what's your impression? Where do you think that, why is that kind of a part of the jiu-jitsu culture, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I guess, in this matter, that it's kind of chill and laid back and not so hierarchical?
A couple big things. To a lesser degree, I think that a lot of Brazilian jiu-jitsu that came to the United States early on, like a lot of the Brazilians, like it was very like surf culture, right? So I mean, and I think early on that was a big part of it, you know, because like a lot of the Brazilians that came to the States, they wanted to move to the coast. They wanted to maintain that kind of surf culture. And a lot of times surf culture is like that, you know, I mean, there's, I don't know a lot about surf culture, but I've had a lot of people explain this to me, and a lot of Brazilians explain this to me. So I'm not just like making this up, right. But it was very much that kind of thing about, you know, just kind of laid back and kind of chill. And, you know, like we're all here for a common purpose, and, you know, we're bettering, we're exploring ourselves, and we're all on this journey, and almost kind of a hippie vibe to it, but a violent hippie vibe to it. But then, you know, I think another part of it too, though, like that's even maybe a deeper rooted thing, is that in traditional martial arts schools, especially old school style, you walk in and there's a lot of formality that's almost paramilitary, because it had to be that way. You're dealing, that's why there's a ranking structure. That's why there's a uniformity to it. You all wear the same thing. Nobody sticks out above anybody else, in so much as up until the ranking is involved. It's like, this is a senior student here. This is a beginner student. This is the instructor. This is the assistant instructor. So there's this rank and file system to it. And that has to be established to maintain order to a degree. So, you know, a lot of times it's a bit of a forced respect thing. You know, now you may have just an inherent, like a general respect because you're there to learn something and this person is helping you learn that. But, you know, there's also something being demanded of you. When you come in, you're here to train this, and I'm going to tell you what to do, and you're going to do it. And you're not going to question me because I'm this person with this rank and whatever. And that's, I think a lot of that had to be established, because if there's too much questioning involved, well, now you kind of have to, you kind of have to like put somebody in their place. And if you're not able to do that with everybody as an instructor, then, you know, there's going to be problems. If you're challenged in an old school karate dojo as the grandmaster black belt up here, and this novice student is questioning you on a technique, well, now all of a sudden you're being undermined in front of the entire class. And so now you're being called to task, and it's like, oh shit, I better be able to like make this technique work on this student right now. Versus in jiu-jitsu, again, like we were talking about before, we all go in and we roll, and, you know, you see me catch this arm bar on everybody, and then I go up in front of the class and I'm going to teach the arm bar. Well, you know, it works already. So like, why would you question the way that I'm telling you to do it? You know, or if you do question it, then maybe it's a detail that I didn't have to think about because I just inherently do it a certain way. So now I have to like sit there and do it. But the conversation, I think, is different. The typically, you know, it's a little bit more relaxed of an environment, and you have respect. The respect is commended through the abilities or the knowledge of the senior instructor, rather than just the rank, you know? So and that's one of the things I like about it, you know, if I do go into a place, because there are definitely jiu-jitsu schools that I won't name, like that you go in and they treat it like an old school karate dojo. And it's like, you know, you you call me this, you bow to me at this time, you
Mm.
say, you repeat after me, you do all these like dojo precepts, you do, and it's just like, man, why? Like, what's the purpose behind that?
Mhm.
I'm a grown ass man. You
Mm.
don't have to instill in me a set of values or respect like I'm in grade school. It's
Right.
I'm coming to you for ultimately a service to help me get better at something. And I want to have a good time doing it. And I want to make friends and I want to have a good, relaxed environment where I'm already stressed out as it is. Like,
Right.
again, I'm a grown ass man who's having to prostrate myself and walk through these doors and say, look, I don't know how to fight so well, which is
Mm.
one of the most integral parts of our identity as men. Like, we
Yeah.
think that we should be able to fight. And for me to go into a place and say, look, I don't feel secure as a human in my ability to fight and defend myself.
Mm.
I need you to help me. Man, that takes a lot. So,
Mm.
if anything, like, I need to show you extra respect as a teacher for you to walk
Yeah.
in, having to admit that to me. You're a 40-year-old grown man with a house and a family, and you're worried that if your wife was in danger, your kid was in danger, you wouldn't be able to help.
Mm.
Like, man, I respect the hell out of you coming through
Mm.
that door
Yeah.
and asking me for help in that. And I hope that I can help you.
Mm.
So
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely a big the difference for me coming from a traditional background and going to like a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu school because of that atmosphere, how different it was. And one of the big things which occurred to me, which we just discussed already, that how the respect was very natural and nobody was asking for that respect or demanding like, oh, bow here or refer to this person like this, and just but everybody respect that person because of that ability. Versus in the other schools there was like, this is how you're supposed to act in front of this person and this is how you have to refer. And it's funny because looking back right now, and I started traditional martial arts in a young age, so I wasn't like really an adult for most part of it. But now as an adult person, I look back, I'm like, I was like, this is so silly, the things I was doing. And, I was part of that culture and it seemed like natural, like, okay, this is the way things are. But the funny thing is I was an adolescent and like young adult, but there are adult people who are still there and still they're doing this. Like there's a quick crazy story that just comes to my mind every time I think about that, where I left the country where I trained primarily, and I was about to visit it again after some years. And a friend of mine who's like one of the senior instructors there, he was telling me, hey, I want to invite you over, but actually let me first ask the sensei if I can do that. And like back then it seemed like, oh yeah, of course you have to ask the sensei. And now I'm like, how can one
yeah.
adult man ask another adult man for permission to invite his friend over? Like, this is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. It is funny though. I mean, I think that there's a lot of that that's just, it's kind of LARPing, it's like
Yeah, right.
it's almost you're doing kind of a fantasy like play, like you picture a movie in your head. There's this like, I'm part of this like special club,
Right.
this special whatever. And I think that there's something instinct inside of us that really likes that feeling of being part of something special. So I get it to that extent, but it is really just silly. It is really just kind of something kind of silly. And that's what I liked too. Like, again, coming from a traditional martial arts background, you stood in a line. The teacher said, okay, we're going to stand in this stance here and we're going to do this movement. And, is basically like, okay, well, why are we doing this? Nobody asked. First of all, you don't ask why we're doing it. Sensei said, do it, since you do it. So if, that, whereas like you go into a typical Brazilian Jiu Jitsu place and the first thing they show you has immediate application.
Right.
It's like, okay, a guy grabs you like this, we're going to do this. It's like, you're in this position, you're going to do this. And it's like, okay, I can see that if I do that, it's going to get me out of this position, or I do that and it's going to, accomplish this thing. I'm going to choke the person, I'm going to break their arm, whatever. Versus like, I've got to hold this posture for this amount of time and just hope that, Mr. Miyagi telling me this has my best interest at heart, and that the actual move is going to magically materialize later. So.
Yeah, it's a great point. I really liked what you said about that LARPing aspect, where, and this also too just occurred to me, that part of us wants that experience, especially like, I guess, growing up with kung fu movies and stories in general, and we want this mystical experience. But then it's also interesting that I think once, like, because in that area of traditional martial arts, not all of them, but a lot of them, there's a lack of practicality and a lot of questionability. And I think that kind of empty space, we fill it with the LARPing aspect, versus if we go to a practical place like boxing or wrestling or Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, whatever, there's so much practicality there that's what primarily occupies our mind. And you can still go to like a wacky, in a good way, like 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu place where you dress up in all these crazy rash guards and everybody's fine. You can come in with like a pink gi and everyone is going to be fine. So there's aspects where you can kind of express yourself, but it's like, I think the practicality just takes the most part, and you don't almost feel like that necessity to go like sensei and, you know, do the whole Miyagi thing anymore.
Right. Yeah. It is funny though to see. I don't really care too much personally for seeing a lot of the places that want to throw it back to that. You know, I mean, it's like I want kind of a comfortable environment, and I think that respect will inherently happen. You know, I mean, if you know that I walk in and I'm the teacher, you're going to be respectful to me. Like, you're not, right. You don't have to like bow and you know, say oaths after everything. And right, yeah. You don't have to even call me by any kind of title. You can call me Eli. You know, I mean, if somebody calls me professor, then I don't correct them. I don't, you know, say anything or whatever, and I respond. But at the same time, it's like, I don't want to come across as pretentious and tell you to call me professor. That's silly. You know, like it's just, I don't know. I think that there's that does a disservice more than it does help anything, you know?
Right. True. And so just one last question, like major one for the conversation. When you look at Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, what's your pet peeve about it? Like, what is there something that bothers you? Like, you're like, oh, I really hate that this is happening, or I wish there was more of this or that. Is there something that comes to your mind when I ask you about that?
Lots.
Okay.
we talked about several of them, you know, I mean,
right.
Just, you know, any of the pretentiousness, any of the, just a lot of the things that to me turned me on to the art that a lot of people, you know, just do like the antithesis of these days. I guess the biggest thing for me is the criticism of someone over here that trains a certain way, that just wants to spend so much of their energy and time hating on this person or these people over here for training this certain way. And it's like, man, you know, I mean, they're probably not doing as much damage as you might think that they're doing. They're probably just annoying you. You know, I mean, it's really what it boils down to. You can say, well, these people over here train a certain way, and so they, you know, they're not doing it right. You know, just whatever your reasoning is. It's like they don't train this aspect of it. They don't train this part right. They're not training hard enough. They're training too hard. You know, these people over here, they're training so hard and so many hours a day and doing all this, their bodies are going to be wrecked by the time they're 30. So, well, maybe they don't give a shit. You know, maybe they don't care if their body's wrecked because they're having a good time now and they're winning all kinds of stuff and it makes them satisfied with something. You know, or these people over here, they don't train hard enough. You know, they're going in, they're too recreational. And it's like, well, maybe that's fulfilling something in them. You know, again, it just boils down to being honest with yourself and honest with your students and honest with your training partners. Just like, what are your goals? You know, be honest about that first of all. You know, and are you really training in a way that you think is supporting those goals? You know, and if you're not, maybe you should train differently. And if you are, then good for you, you know. But I think that more than anything, it's just, I get why certain things have to be done. You know, I get, one of the most disgusting parts of it is the financial aspect of it. That's why a lot of people will put down a lot of other places. You know, that's why the reasons come out. I guess that's the thing that really bothers me more than anything. It's like, if you're over here saying these people over here aren't training right, I know you're saying that because you need an excuse to put down the way these people are training, because their numbers have been growing. Like it'd be the same thing as if I watch, like, we'll take YouTube, for example. And I'm like, I see I don't know, just a random channel, like say Hard to Hurt. And I say, this son of a bitch over here, he passed my channel up. And he's not doing this and this, and I'm doing this instead. And so he's not as good as me in this regard. And it's like, man, why does that help me out? And honestly, who's going to listen to that? Because ultimately the way that I come across, if I'm going to talk that way, is negative and just like a hater, and that's all you're doing is you're just hating on something else. Now, that's not to say there aren't legitimate gripes out there. I could, if I see the Detroit urban survival tactics guy, and I say, okay, he needs to just go away. Like, he just doesn't need to be a thing anymore. It's because he's a joke. He's a farce. And he's portraying himself as legitimate. And the worst part is, like, he's actually getting students. Like, he actually has people that believe that he's doing something real. And it is offensive, as legitimate real martial artists who have dedicated our lives to doing this, that somebody can just come along and be a clown and, because of the magic of the internet, like make a name for themselves. So, I mean, there is that, but that's not me hating the fact that if you can make money doing almost anything, I'm going to probably be supportive of you. But whenever you're just a charlatan and you're duping people and you're causing more harm than good, that's a legitimate gripe, I guess. But that's not what I see in jiu-jitsu a lot of the time. Most of the time that somebody's complaining about this team or that group or this gym or whatever, a lot of it's jealousy, a lot of it's insecurity, and I think that's the worst thing that can happen.
Right. Yeah, when you talk about the Troid guy, it's even like listening to it, I feel it's not personal. It's not like you're hating on him. It's like, oh, this stupid son of a gun or whatever. But it's like you're stating a fact. Okay, well, actually, what he's doing is not fair, and it's actually even dangerous, I think, to teach people like that. But most of the times people are they're personal. They're like, oh, this guy, and there's a negative, like, personal feeling with it, which I think is the worst part. Because if I think objectively to look at something and to be like, to consider, well, okay, well, this, even like jiu-jitsu school, they're training rough, and there's likely that they're going to have injuries later on, but it's like, but I don't have an issue that, like, as you said, like I don't hate that. I'm not hating on them. There's nothing personal for me there. It's just like an observation, but there's always like both sides. And and actually, to make sure I don't forget this one, so for people who listened for the whole thing and they want more, so where should they go for more of your stuff?
Let's see, almost anywhere. Like, you type in Eli Knight or knight-jiu-jitsu, like, then I'll pop up, like, so my YouTube channel is a big one, but I've got a Patreon, and then I've got like instructionals out. So I've got BJJ Fanatics and Jiu-Jitsu X. I have instructionals with them. I've got a big one called Jiu-Jitsu Deep Dive. That's with the Budo brothers. And that's got a lot of information on it. But I've put a lot of instructionals out with a whole bunch of stuff, and that's why there's not a whole lot of self-defense stuff on my channel anymore. I put a lot of instructionals out for self-defense stuff, and I kind of keep it more relegated there, and then do a little bit more sporty and fun stuff on my YouTube channel these days, with the occasional pop-up of self-defense stuff. But those things, the Patreon, the YouTube, the BJJ Fanatics, Jiu-Jitsu X, Budo Brothers, anywhere you put in Eli Knight or Knight Jiu-Jitsu, I think it should pop up.
You mentioned a knife course. Is it something that's still in development, or is there?
Knife control concepts. You can find that course online, and it is a course. It's like segmented into, like, this is the skill set. This is the drill that we're working on here. Here's how to train it. Here's a way to implement it in your training. And again, it's a good thing too. I like plug and play systems where you don't you don't have to like be a convert to this kind of thing. It's like, this is something you can supplement into your current training now. The Knife Control Concepts is a great course. Again, me, Aaron Giannetti, Mike Chaney, and we do a lot of seminars. There's actually one in Utah this weekend that I unfortunately wasn't able to go to, but there's another one coming up in Ohio. We just did one in, Virginia, and I think the last one was maybe Oregon or somewhere, but we do them all over the place. So
nice.
yeah.
Awesome.